The tone seems to be shifting, and a lot of the focus is on Europe and the fact that maybe we're at the limit of monetary policy and governments need to do more fiscally. Are leaders listening to that?
Well, definitely, yes. I mean, we have gone through a period of very expansionary monetary policy. What we see with the most recent decisions is there's not a lot of space left. The effectiveness of this policy acting alone is maybe not the desired one, or that's not what we need to reactivate the economy. So I think that there's a consensus being built on the need for fiscal policy and structural reforms to join in so that we can really have a stronger growth going forward.
What can Spain do?
Well, Spain, first and foremost, needs to continue its fiscal consolidation policy because we still have a quite high debt to GDP ratio. We have been able to go down and the trend is clearly a downward one, but we need to continue on that track and also to reduce the public deficit to GDP, which we have been able to bring down to 2%, but still, so we do not have that large fiscal space that some other countries, such as Germany, for example, may have to be more expansionary from the fiscal point of view. Nevertheless, what we will try to do in the coming mandate in the next 4 years is obviously to use all this margin to invest, to focus our efforts on those areas which can have the most positive impact in terms of growth, potential growth, productivity, future prosperity at the end of the day.
I took a quick surveillance gaze down all the data of the IMF, of the GDP forecasts. Every line is moving down except the United States of America is flat and up. In Spain is flat and up. What is the Spanish distinction right now to keep that vector up, to keep economic growth going, where so many others in Europe are struggling?
Indeed, Spain has shown a very remarkable resilience in a quite challenging international context. I think first of all because we did have a long, protracted crisis. We came out of the crisis later than other countries. It was only in 2014 that we started to have positive growth, and that means that the cycle has still some steam, some way to go. Domestic demand is dynamic and should be pushing the economy forward a bit. And the second main driver is external demand. In a context which is challenging from the trade point of view and the slowdown of the rest of the world, Spanish companies are showing a lot of competitiveness. They're able to gain market share. We have
Does the euro harm you at these levels? I mean,
no.
We go nation to nation, Francine and I, in these interviews. And that's always a key question, but are you in the middle ground on that tough question?
Actually, we're quite comfortable with the euro exchange rate as it is right now. It is not damaging Spanish competitiveness. Inflation is below the EU average. Of course, our main trading partners are inside the eurozone, so that also plays a role. I think it's mostly the fact that the Spanish economy has opened a lot in these last 10 years, and companies have gained a lot of competitiveness. For the moment, at least, our growth is remarkably balanced. Internal demand and external demand are both pooling, and I hope that if the eurozone starts growing, healthily and steadily going forward, that will also help us keep this growth rate forward.
Your agricultural sector was hit by U.S. tariffs. Is there anything you can do to mitigate that, and how much of a burden will it actually be? Can you put a number on it?
Well, there have been a number of estimates, because indeed, as you rightly point out, the U.S. authorities have threatened. I would insist on this idea because we still have 24 hours to go, and I have to hope until the last moment that we do not go to this phase, that this is nothing but a threat. But indeed, they have threat with retaliatory measures because of the Airbus judgment, particularly hitting Spanish products like red wine, like olive oil and olives, products which I'm sure the U.S. citizens love very much.
Absolutely not.
I share your concern.
Is this with sherry as well? The Williams and Humbert sherry?
I presume
and the
so.
others?
I think, I'm not sure if it's only wine or it includes also specific wines like sherry.
Let me talk about tourism, which is so important. And I hear this from everybody. You had the Thomas Cook debacle in the United Kingdom as well. How are you going to jumpstart the relationship of tourism with the United States of America? It's settled and solid and profound in Europe. What's the plan to jumpstart Spanish tourism even further?
Well, that's an interesting question because indeed the tourism sector represents a big share of our GDP. It's around 12% of GDP.
12% of GDP.
It is very big in Spain. We have been growing market share. We are considered to be one of the most competitive countries also coming to tourism. So I think that we would do our utmost to try to attract more US tourists to Spain, definitely.
can we go back to the tariffs? Tom got distracted when we mentioned red wine, not being able to drink Spanish red wine. But on serious note, so 24 hours, how much will it hurt your economy?
Well, I am not so worried about how much it hurts the economy as such, because this represents a relatively small share of our GDP, and we're talking about a part of these products, although the impact would be quite focused on some regions and the social impact is much more important. We're talking about farmers, we're talking about agro-food producers, so these are not the strongest sides of our society, you know. So, well, I was insisting on the idea I would avoid it, because the US has in front the EU, which is also a very important trading partner, and we're working with the EU to try to see how to face this kind of threats. We could use the fact that there are some regulatory measures that have been authorized to the EU years ago. We could look into a list of products that would hurt also the US economy. We would have to wait and see what happens with the Boeing judgment, which is going to come down the line. There are a number of measures that could be taken, but nobody wins from this kind of escalation of trade wars. We're much more interested in engaging in a constructive dialogue and avoiding these kind of threats.
How does Brexit impact the Spanish economy? So today we have a deal. We now need to see whether Westminster actually signs up on it. But if we do get the current deal in place, is that beneficial for the Spanish economy?
Well, in the Brexit case, we're talking about lose-lose. I don't think that there's anything that could be beneficial. What we're talking about is avoiding the worst-case scenario. And we had indeed good news this morning when we saw that there's a beginning of an agreement. It shows the maturity and the willingness to deal of the EU authorities that have been willing to try to find a deal in a very complicated circumstances. Now we have to see. The ball is on the UK roof. I really hope that we get this deal through and that we avoid this worst-case scenario, which would be a no deal on the 31st of October. Now, what we have been doing in the last months is to prepare for the worst. So we have taken all possible measures at the government level, at the company level in Spain, to minimize the potential damage.
You mentioned lose-lose, and there are the images of Catalonia, the emotion there of Barcelona and the rest. Our Maria Tadeo's given us wonderful coverage on that. What is the urgency to fix this battle between Madrid and Spain and the people of Catalonia?
Well, I would not describe this as a conflict at all as between Spain and the people of Catalonia, to be very frank. This is more of a conflict between Catalans, because a majority of the Catalan society does not subscribe to this secessionist kind of push, but this minority has been able to impose their views from the power of being in government, in the regional government. Unfortunately, these last days we're seeing that this has turned quite violent. The images of last night in Barcelona remind me very much of the Gilets jaunes in Paris. Violence leads nowhere, and I hope that we can engage in a much more constructive dialogue, first and foremost between the Catalans. You know, they have to sort it out themselves. And from the perspective of the Spanish government, what we have been doing for the last 16 months is trying to engage constructively, launch a dialogue within the law with the Catalan authorities. I hope that we can continue on this track in the future and that this violence goes down as soon as possible.
Minister, how do you expect ECB policies to change under Christine Lagarde, who takes over November 1st?
Well, Christine Lagarde is an appointment of continuity. You know, I wouldn't expect a revolution or a radical change from day one. What is clear is that she comes at a critical moment, because this is the moment, as we were discussing a moment ago, where monetary policy is reaching the limits of what it can achieve. So she will have to see how to get out of this situation, normalize monetary policies, and how to find the right balance with fiscal policy at the EU level, at the Eurozone level, at national level, and how to embark in a process of structural reforms that brings growth again to a higher level at the EU.